Hello. Thank you very much. First of all, for the last talk, it was amazingly interesting. And also, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and to say that we are very sorry because we planned to come, but eventually we couldn't make it. So this current talk is about Ashkenazic Hebrew. So there were Sephardim, very generally speaking, and there were Ashkenazic Jews. And this talk about contemporary modern Ashkenazic Hebrew. Yes, thank you, Lily. This talk now is the result of our project actually on contemporary Hasidic Yiddish. And while researching contemporary Yiddish in Hasidic communities, we found out that the Hebrew language they use is quite different from Israeli Hebrew and different from literary varieties which exist nowadays. And also we saw that this specific type of Hebrew is used productively, though it's not spoken. And we started to research it. And I should mention Izzy Posen, who himself was a member of a Hasidic community in the UK, in London. He's working in our project as a research assistant, and he did a lot to this particular part of the project. And among other things, there was Izzy Posen who conducted 9 interviews for this talk, talking about specifically only about contemporary Ashkenazic Hebrew.
So I'll first just give a very quick historical overview of what we mean by Ashkenazic Hebrew. So as Mahir discussed earlier, Hebrew was in use throughout the medieval period in all areas of the Jewish world as a written language, and it was a productive written language. It wasn't just restricted to liturgy in the synagogue and prayer context. It was used for writing, as he mentioned, medical and scientific literature to a lesser extent than Arabic, but also poetry, fables, all kinds of writing. And this continued to be the case as the majority of the Jewish population shifted into Central and Eastern Europe in predominantly in the 15th, 16th centuries. The kind of major Jewish population centers ended up in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, in Russia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which were Yiddish-speaking. But this kind of traditional diglossic system that obtained throughout the Jewish world continued to be preserved in Ashkenazic communities, Ashkenazic meaning Central and Eastern European Jews. So the H language was Hebrew, and it was not a spoken language, not a vernacular, and this L language was Yiddish. So Ashkenazic Hebrew was a prestige written language, and it was used for all kinds of documents. And as we have discussed in previous research, Ashkenazic Hebrew had its own very distinctive linguistic features. It had its own phonological system, which corresponded to Yiddish, its own orthographic features, grammatical features, and lexical features. And the kind of traditional view, or the sort of general understanding, is that it kind of stopped being used as a written language in the early to mid 20th century, first obviously because of the Holocaust, and also a shift away from the traditional diglossic system to using one language, either Hebrew, modern Hebrew in Israel, or English, French, and other languages in the new geographical centers where Jews settled in large numbers in the interwar period, and obviously as refugees after the Holocaust. So there's kind of this idea that Ashkenazic Hebrew, which is itself very sort of poorly understood and not very well researched, is kind of a relic of the pre-Israeli Hebrew past and ceased to exist.
During only this conference twice, there was this idea of Hebrew revival as an important example theoretically of how a language could be revived. And this our talk today goes well into this topic generally, because actually we have very poor understanding of what Hebrew was before the revival. What was this language? What were its linguistic and maybe even more importantly sociolinguistic properties? And Hasidic communities nowadays, they gave us an amazing opportunity to look at this, because it seems that their situation is very similar to a historical one. So Hasidim this is a conglomerate of ultra-Orthodox Jewish groups, and they live in. There are several centers, as you can see on this picture, in the USA, in Israel, a little bit in Australia, in the UK, and in Antwerp. There is a quite large and important center of Hasidic life. These groups have very specific, strict, and very different type of life, and their strict religion shapes the whole culture, like on the very daily basis, and linguistic culture also. Can we go further? Thank you.
So in this talk, we really want to focus on Ashkenazic Hebrew as an unusual case of part of a diglossic system, and as an unusual minority language, because normally the focus is on vernaculars when we're talking about minority and endangered languages. And in many cases, they don't have a standard or they don't have a written tradition. So in this respect, Ashkenazic Hebrew, contemporary Ashkenazic Hebrew is unusual because it's still used today in Hasidic communities as it was used historically by Jews in Eastern Europe. But it has never been used as a spoken language. It's always been a written language. And so a written tradition is all that it has. And interestingly, it remains very sustainable over many centuries, dating back to the medieval period. You find Ashkenazic Hebrew still used in the same way that it was used then, now in the 21st century in Hasidic communities. So we kind of want to just show you some of the ways in which Ashkenazic Hebrew is used and how it's perceived. We won't talk about the linguistic features in this session, but it also has its own distinctive linguistic features. Just to kind of, hopefully this can sort of contribute a different kind of case study to our, kind of understanding of diglossia.
So here is a list of Ferguson's famous features of diglossia. So first of all, Hebrew Yiddish diglossia does not fit Ferguson's idea, because you have a Semitic and a Germanic language. So this is more towards Fishman's understanding, but actually the sociolinguistic features and even language features are closer to Ferguson understanding if we keep aside this one crucially important factor. So I will start with the stability, with the last point. We know this diglossia from the Middle Ages, so it's about 13th century. And as far as we can observe it in the 21st century, it's quite stable and long. We will talk about function in the following slides. Ashkenazic Hebrew and all different variety of Hebrew texts are of high prestige among Hasidim. And of course, there is a literary heritage to start with the Bible. It is really acquired via education, but it's not that easy, and we will discuss it too, I hope, if we have time. And standardization is not very simple too. So in very general words, it is more or less a standardized variety, but if we come closer, we see that it's not quite so.
So sorry, I just have to warn you, you might hear my dog barking at any moment, which always happens when I'm in the middle of a talk. So in terms of the linguistic aspects of the contemporary Hebrew Yiddish diglossia, we see that it's an unusual case, as Sonia mentioned, because the grammar, instead of being a continuum, you have very different grammatical categories between the H and the L variety, because Hebrew is a Semitic language and Yiddish is an Indo-European, a Germanic language. The same is kind of true of the lexicon. There is some overlap, which hopefully we'll have time to show you. And then in terms of phonology, it's kind of typical for a diglossic system in that the sound systems are a single phonological unit.
This slide is just to point out that passively a lot of various varieties of Hebrew are used by Hasidim: biblical, rabbinic, medieval Hebrew, and even Aramaic. And this is called Loshen Kodesh, which is the holy language by Hasidim themselves. And this is more or less what we knew about them. What is something new is that they do use productively some specific variety, which is very similar to historical Ashkenazic Hebrew as we know it in the 19th century and before. And this is Ashkenazic Hebrew. The next slide, please. So here are two lists just to show you how these two languages are working inside Hasidic communities. So mainly there are two internal languages, Hebrew and Yiddish, used, and some external languages too. External bilingualism, sorry, is called by Fishman. In most cases, it is English if it's the UK or the USA. So let's focus on Hebrew. Apart from, so the bold lines are those which are used productively by contemporary Hasidim. Performance on a special occasion, for example, a batchen on a sort of a stand-up comic on a wedding can talk in Ashkenazic Hebrew to make the audience laugh, and this is only male audience we are talking about here. There are new songs composed in Ashkenazic Hebrew. There are a lot of official, intellectual, scholarly, and religious texts composed yearly, like in those years. On the very family and day-to-day basis, short messages and cards on a special occasion, even if it's on WhatsApp, they're composed in Ashkenazic Hebrew. Or I'm reading a Williamsburg Hasidic group on Facebook, and their daily news. They are, so from the grammar, you can recognize that this is Ashkenazic Hebrew, and this is wrong or very different from the point of view of modern Israeli Hebrew. I think the next slide.
So this just gives you a little bit of an overview of the types of text genres that are composed in Ashkenazic Hebrew. So as we mentioned, it's purely a written language. It's not spoken, but it is the vehicle of a very rich variety of contemporary literature. So there are all kinds of community announcements, longer narrative books like this one, if you can see here. This is a kind of book length narrative history of one of the Hasidic leaders. This is a pamphlet about education, contemporary education, and these are some lecture notes and the private diary of students in yeshiva in a Talmudic academy, which are written for the learner's own, for the student's own, kind of personal record keeping in Ashkenazic Hebrew. And you can see here some examples of pashkevilin, which are like kind of polemical community announcements that are either posted on walls or distributed electronically. This one is about the UK government's anti-radicalization policy, which is called Prevent, and its effect on Hasidic communities. This one is about COVID instructions, and it's in Ashkenazic Hebrew and English. And then this one is another COVID instruction. So you can see like kind of really important practical information that is meant to be read and is kind of up to the minute. These are all from last year, written in Ashkenazic Hebrew. And again, to stress it, we're not talking about the language in this, but it's very different grammatically from Israeli Hebrew. It's not Israeli Hebrew.
So here, the question is, how this language, which is not a vernacular at all, how do people acquire it? This is a written language, and we can assume that maybe they are learning it with grammars and different exercises. And the mystery is the situation is the opposite. So Hasidim do learn this language, do acquire it via education, but there are no classes in Hebrew. There is no teaching as we used to it. So in this way, even inactive and productive knowledge of Ashkenazic Hebrew is a side effect of their system of education. And the central practice, the central cultural practice there is called Taich. Taich is a specific manner of learning in Haider. It's the Hasidic school, where a teacher reads in Haider, it's Tanakh, it's Bible. So Bible is read aloud by a teacher with a very small chunks. It's several words. So several words in Hebrew and then several words in Yiddish. And this is pronounced with a specific tune, and pupils are supposed to repeat it all chunk by chunk after the melamed, after the teacher, and then some of the passages are discussed. From talking with the Hasidim, it's becoming clear that in many cases, and I should mention that kids start to learn in Haider at the age of 3 or 4, so they're really quite small kids. They're coming to a school, and in many cases, they don't know Hebrew or Yiddish word. These are just new notions for them. But surprisingly, via this odd for us way of education, they really acquire both languages, and they really acquire Hebrew on a very high level.
2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll go very quickly through basically secondary education, continues in the same vein, where you gradually build up knowledge of different Hebrew and Aramaic texts until kind of boys are expected to start writing Hebrew on their own, and that will be Ashkenazic Hebrew.
Gender is a very important part of this issue. So women know passively some quite limited form of Hebrew. They know for sure long texts of Hebrew prayers, and in many cases that's it. They do not read in Hebrew, they don't read new text, and they are not supposed to understand it. Their knowledge of Hebrew is enough to know what they do not know, and enough to understand the importance of this like male knowledge of Loshen Kodesh, of this holy language. I think we can go.
For adult males, being able to write in Hebrew is considered a mark of adulthood, masculinity, and education. So it's considered like kind of a real a sign of being a member of the scholarly class. And so it's a kind of prestige thing to be able to write in Ashkenazic Hebrew. So if someone is, say, a shopkeeper or another member of the like kind of working class as opposed to the scholarly class, they probably won't use it in writing, although they will be able to read the sorts of announcements that we showed you a minute ago. But writing it is really kind of a mark of the sort of highest level of scholarly prestige.
It is different from Israeli Hebrew, as we mentioned already. Its sound is entirely different. And here is a very nice quotation of the understanding of the speakers. Because everybody speaks it, meaning Hebrew, it lessens the impact and the beauty and the sanctity of the language. Because everybody speaks it. You know, the prostitute in Rehovot or Tel Aviv and the prisoner who has murdered some people all speak exactly the same language. So this is like for a speaker who lives in diglossia, this is even difficult to imagine how it is possible that people from very different social statuses can speak the same language.
So by the same token, Ashkenazic Hebrew is seen as a holy language, and pre-modern, any kind of pre-modern Hebrew by extension. So you can see, like people saying, you can say something inappropriate in Yiddish, you can't say it in Hebrew because Hebrew is a language of sanctification. And this again is Ashkenazic Hebrew as opposed to Israeli Hebrew.
Can we go to phonetics?
Mm-hmm.
I think. This is just to show you that three large varieties of contemporary Yiddish exist now, and three varieties of Ashkenazic Hebrew fit it quite well. So if in some variety we say Peter for butter, and in the other we say puter for butter, then for Hebrew there will be Pirim in the first one and Purim in the second one. So the structure of the main differentiation, the main features which differentiate these varieties in Yiddish and in Ashkenazic Hebrew are the same. And now we are approaching the conclusions.
Just to conclude, like we said, Ashkenazic Hebrew, contemporary Ashkenazic Hebrew represents a continuation of this very long-term stable diglossic system with Yiddish that's been known in the Central and Eastern European Jewish communities since the medieval period. While it is in some ways a typical case of diglossy, it exhibits some important differences from other cases like Latin and Arabic, mainly to do with the fact that one element is a Semitic language and the other element is a Germanic language. So you don't have this kind of continuum. You have more of a very distinct, either you're using Yiddish or you're using Ashkenazic Hebrew. But the similarity is the kind of centrality of Ashkenazic Hebrew as considered to be holy, although it's used for all kinds of practical, mundane purposes, as we've seen. One of the reasons for this might be, this distinctiveness might be the fact that Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. It's a very, kind of self-contained and in some ways isolated culture, and that's particularly true of the Hasidic community. And that these kinds of skills of mastering the H language are sort of regarded as a prestige marker for all of the male population. So there's a very gendered aspect to it as well, and a class aspect. So that was, sorry, very, very rushed, but hopefully we got some of the main points across.